Hey everyone, welcome back. This is Scott from the Dunleading Warcry. Uh, as you can tell by this video going up super early, I was up really early and actually got to witness the FAQs dropping. So today I'm going to be doing a quick little video just going through all the updates between the FAQs and the erratas, talking about how I think it impacts any play, and then showing for a couple of them at least some examples. So just going through the article pretty quickly. Of course, they start it with a Balrog picture. Um, they talk about how they're going through stuff. They give a quick little blip about a couple things that we're going to see later on how they ruled it. They did also mention one that they mistakenly left out of the document, namely shield wall prone due to cavalry charge. Um, it's not present in the doc later, so we might see an update to the docs soon. If there is anything by the time the video is ready, I will add it on to the end as a little addendum. But they talk about making way, monster BPAs while prone, um, the shield wall prone if they fix it, and then Gwahir's piercing cry got some updates, and then they also finally fixed some match play stuff, and then they actually did some balance changes. So we were not sure whether they were going to actually do it. We did not get a repeat of August where they said they didn't have enough data. Clearly, there's enough data. So they did some updates. Now, the data might not be the greatest when it comes to some of the updates, as I'll touch on, but they did do some. But they focused White Hand and Depths got some changes, um, namely some Grima stuff, and then drums were also affected. We'll touch on as they come down. But they actually did an a buff, which was really nice, with Army of Thor getting an upgrade, which is really cool. So heading straight into the FAQs, so we have the rules manual. It's got a few things. Can a model make way into a control zone? Yes. It was some people pointed out that as a it doesn't say it there versus back away, and it's like you can't play that way. If you were to play that way, the game would be unplayable. You would just never be able to do anything. Um, on top of that, can models benefiting from a successful heroic combat dismount make jump, leap, climb, or swim tests, or pick up objects as part of this additional move? They said yes, which is a good clarification. I know there was some mixed understandings of what you could and couldn't do. People campaign for both ways. I'm normally a rules as written guy, but even I found that it was about a 50-50 toss up between it. So they've opted to clarify that you get to do this. Um, if a monster wins a duel whilst prone, can they still use brutal power attacks? No, they stand up. Again, to me, that was like a really, um, it. You can't make strikes. If you can't make strikes, you can't forego making them to do something else. Brutal power attacks, especially this edition, are very clearly in place of strikes, and if you can't make strikes, you can't do it. This probably also is a very strong indication of the interaction with the Golden King. Again, you can't make strikes against him. You probably can't use BPAs against him. I would expect more to be ruling in line with you can't use BPAs at all. I know there's some mixed opinions on whether damaging stuff can be used against him, but I do think that the way that they've worded this FAQ, even the non-damaging ones, might not be able to be used. But I could still see mixed rulings between damaged and non-damaging. Chariot being wounded by something that would kill instantly. Does it affect the hero? Um, it says any hero would be affected as described the second paragraph on page 101. To my knowledge, without checking, that is the Throne Rider aspect. You get tossed. This pretty solidly shows the hero is a separate model. Sure, it's one model with certain respects to things, but if you kill one part of it, it's not killing the other part. They are separate in that regard. They have separate wounding. You can't strike at the rider. You can't shoot at the rider. They're separate, and that's the way they went about it this edition. They wanted to clear up some of the issues from last, and that goes in line with that. What happens if two models that are carrying a heavy object together need to make a jump, leap, climb, or swim test? So once they're both in a relevant position, make a single roll for the required test and apply it to both models. That's an interesting way to go about it. Um, we didn't really know how this worked last edition, even, let alone this edition. Of course, now it's a little easier when you're dealing with heavy objects. Something that is missed by people is you don't have to maintain your positioning around it. When you're activating two models to lift something up, you actually remove the object, move the two models, and then place it in base contact with both. So what they're saying here is effectively, ultimately, you will be in a position that both are in the same spot. So you can't have one on either side of the barrier. You're going to have both on the same. And then the object will get placed in base contact with them. That's how that works now. So that's a reasonable update. Here's a fun one. So Barge, they actually updated. They were unhappy with the 3 inches that you were making way. Now they have updated it that it is going to move the minimum amount it needs in order to allow the model back away 3 inches. So if you could make way 1 inch to allow it to back away the 3 inches, you do that. You don't have to make way a full 3 inches. So that means if before, if you made way 2 inches to allow the model to back away 3 inches, that 2 inches would result in you being knocked prone. You don't have to do that anymore. Now it is a minimum. So you won't be knocked prone basically as a make way model. There's no way to have that happen anymore. Only the back way model can be knocked prone if it's impossible to make way. Or sorry, if the make way wouldn't clear it, of course you don't back away. Or if you choose not to make way, because again, making way is optional. Nothing's changed in that regard. This even solidifies it. Some people have argued that the second paragraph means that you have to choose to make way. It doesn't. It just tells you what you do when you make way. You do not have to make way, but if you do, there's some updates. So I'm gonna quickly grab TTS down here in the corner. I'm actually gonna make it a little bigger so you can see. I didn't think that one through a tremendous amount, but let's pop that up here a little bit so you can see this. You don't need to see my face. So here's some nice things. So here's the easy example. So let's say the Fearful Isengard troll here. It has won a duel against this guy, and this guy smartly did not support that, because why would an elf get a support against a troll? He's gonna just give up a kill. He wants to barge, and he wants to send him this way, which is still very okay to do. This guy's going to move the minimum distance. The minimum distance is him sliding, for example, this way, to allow him to go back like this. There is no way to game this, to my knowledge, beyond, of course, things being packed in to force a certain way. But this is how you would barge now. The minimum distance. If that minimum distance is 0.1 inches, like this, it's 0.1 inches. You do less to allow it to go. You no longer are going that full 3 inches just because. So you can't just send him this way. It's going to be strictly minimum. You can see that when it comes to a greater wall over here. This troll is fighting this guy, and the elves, again, smartly decided not to support there, even though I clearly messed up and he's not in base contact. Right now, for him to go the 3 inches that he wants to go, his make way is going to bring him an inch that way to clear the space. That is the minimum. You cannot choose to send him this way 3 inches, because that is not the minimum. This is the minimum. You can extrapolate that out into various different example situations. It just gets more convoluted from there. But I think that is a pretty good change. If I can find TTS to hide it. It is getting a bit obnoxious with some, especially when you consider some of the monster mashes that are barging half the time. It gets tedious when every model is moving 3 inches, and it just gets all craziness. It was more of an annoyance. I didn't personally find it that impactful in my games. Of course, I am a swarm player, so most of the time I was making it so that Barge did nothing anyway. But it definitely took up some time. There were some games where I mean I was just sitting there. I would charge with everybody, and then they'd win, and then I just barge, and it'd be about 10 minutes barging to back everyone away and all that. It was just nasty. So this makes it a little quicker, I hope. Um, less people trying to go for those crazy niche situations. Um, or maybe they'll go for it more. I don't know. I'm sure there's a way to apply this in an aggressive manner. Moving on to Armies of Lord of the Rings, we've got some Gwahir stuff. So they have stated, so Gwahir, how he works is models that are within 6 inches of Gwahir when they are activated are what are affected. So even though they're calling this FQ, ultimately this is an errata. I will maintain because it didn't say that before. It didn't mention anything about the models when they activate. It just said that they couldn't move. Now it's clarifying and pointing that it is models that are within 6 inches when they're activated. Now, if they're within when he declares, but not within when they activate, they're not affected. I will skip to the end quickly, even though there's a bunch more, to note that they have also updated it in that models that are affected by him just can't charge. So they can move normally outside that. So it's the equivalent of being affected by like a heroic march, which is so much better. It was a little ridiculous, especially considering how they have opted to clarify slash errata how Gwahir works. Uh, that was just obnoxious. You would have half the army affected, and then later the other half of the army. So you couldn't even heroic move. Now you could still heroic move, which is important because now your heroes are not just locked down. I know I personally insulate them pretty well, but I know that was a challenge point for a lot of people is actually insulating your heroes, especially with lower count lists. You can just heat piercing cries. You're just SOL when it comes to where you are right now. And then he goes and kills other things, and you're just locked down in too many different places. They've done away with that, so you can reposition, you can move around, you can run away. There's a lot of different little things that will be able to have counterplay with this, because ultimately there was no counterplay before at all, besides padding areas, which is just that's I don't think that rises to a true level of counterplay personally. We've got an update for Realms of Men. They have finally shut down the people that are claiming that siege veterans are heroes of fortitude, and you can include any number of them. They're minor heroes. So stop with that. Although my favorite joke to always make was if they argued that it was a hero of fortitude, I would argue that the siege weapon can't be included because it doesn't have the faction keyword. You could still make that argument, but it's a pretty loony one. They have clarified for Whips of the Master special rule that it's going to be one. There was some vagueness between whether each trigger was an independent rule. You were only benefiting from one, but they have opted to say that it's just going to be one. You can have 3 taskmasters, it's just going to be one. There's a little back and forth on that with some different groups ruling different ways, but it's very clear now. Greba, they've clarified Maelstrom or Recon, he runs on. Some people were trying to argue that he arrives independent of everyone else, or some people argue he just appears. No, he runs on the battlefield. He's part of the warband. He runs on. That's how he does that. Now with some more Erratas, of course, Sheila upgraded to 80 millimeters. That was clearly coming based on the new model. We did get some Grima updates in terms of how he operates. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the core of it is that models can now move through Grima. He could move through before. Now they can move through him while he's considered friendly. Good change. I think it was a little weird that he blocked stuff from moving, considering he didn't get blocked. But notably, his base, they still can't end overlapping. So they need to account for that. So there's still some shenanigans with where he places. Of course, he can still trap things. That has not changed. And they have upgraded or updated his restrictions, basically, or what reveals him. Now it is if Saruman suffers an unsaved wound rather than is slain. So 1 wound gets through, you flub those 3 fate, he's going down. I don't ultimately think that's a big impact because for my games, if Saruman has died or even been wounded, I've probably already lost, and I think that that is well represented a lot with White Hand. Muster, it's a little harder, and that might come up more. That's unfortunate for Muster, but it is what it is. On top of that, they have said that Grima can never be chosen as a target in scenarios that require players to select friendly or enemy hero models, such as Fog of War or Assassination. Um, Fog of War is a little whatever. I have found in the latter half of last year that it was very difficult to actually keep him fresh. Fog of War is a rougher scenario for White Hand, I've found. If you play it at pace, which is always a subjective thing, um, there's not an unreasonable chance that you break with how you have to go for terrain and all that. And it wasn't effective to just have Grima go for terrain alone. There was a chance he would run away and you would lose points on that, which made it very risky. Assassination, I'm a bit disappointed. I liked picking him as my assassin. I thought it was pretty funny. I didn't get any opportunities to stab people, but I actually picked him as my assassin in the event that I went to. Was it last weekend now? I don't know what day it is anymore. Um, but oh, it was 2 weeks ago now, right? Yeah, I don't know what day it is. Um, then the next thing, on top of Grima changes, White Hand's lightning has been changed. Now it reflects Grima. So before you could ignore him, now you got to watch for him. Again, I don't think that like I know it has an impact. People have claimed so far in the TTS based Discord that people can't really Palantir to Lightning because Grima's in a position where they also can't counterplay. But it's ultimately that's not true because you can Palantir and Grima can just walk away. But it's one of those like I don't ever Palantir on the first turn. Like I have found that if you are Palantiring on the first turn, either you've made a mistake in doing it, or your opponent has made a mistake in deployment. I think in either effect, um, something was missed in terms of skill and tactics, which I don't really feel like that justifies anything. But I could see this impacting some stuff when it comes to closer scenarios of deployment. It could impact Maelstrom a little bit. Um, Usually, White Hand, if they're coming on first, they're Gale Winding. If they're coming on second, they're Lightninging. Now, of course, you got to reflect Grima with that. So if your opponent rolls well and comes together, you might not get Lightning. That's okay. As I've grown with White Hand more and more, I've actually found that the fear of lightning and even gale winds can be more impactful than actively using them. So I don't think this is tremendous. It might impact more like middle of the pack players. I don't really see it personally impacting mine. In general, though, I've been playing less White Hand. I talked about it in my last video. I haven't felt good about playing White Hand, so I don't know how much I'm going to play it to begin with. I mean, I'm playing it this upcoming weekend, but it's a 500 more thematic list where I don't even have Grima and Krebine are not allowed because no flyers. It's just Saruman and hobos, so I'm quite literally not affected by anything that's changed or will change as we get to the rest of it. Um, Depths of Moria has been shanked. Drums in the Deep has been changed to a once per game. So it's done at the start of the move phase. They can declare it, and it's the -1 penalty to courage tests, +1 to friendly goblin tests, and then banner for the rest of the turn. So there is no more every turn. So goblin spam, I think, is dead. I don't think there is a reason to take it, unless you just happen to have all the models. I definitely think now Usurpers is going to be a clear higher caliber spam list because this once per game is there's just it's not gonna be that impactful. I think the odds that it is impactful is like you basically have to be running the Balrog. Um, I mean now it makes the Balrog make sense with his Harbinger. People will be happy about that. That's always a common complaint. Why does he have Harbinger if everyone's got -1? It doesn't stack. Now it matters. So now there's a reason to take the Balrog, which is cool. And this could probably be a once per game that does well with the Balrog on a good turn where he's got a heroic combat with a goblin with him and he's looking for that going for gold play. So that's nice to have. That's Lord of the Rings. Hobbit's very minimal. The only update is that Army of Thor, they can now have 50% throwing weapons rather than 33%. Great change. That was a common weirdness and complaint in that you your army composition was just weird, especially with the bump of Erebor dwarves this edition and the heroes getting more expensive. It was a little weird with how you set up. Now you can do 50%. I think that's a good change. Frontline Kingsguard and Grimhammers, backline dwarves, I think is a very solid change. Armies of Middle-earth, we got a few things. So we've got a clarification on Great Eye, which is great. So for Recon or Maelstrom, it's actually going to be deployed touching its controlling player's board edge. You determine the board edge the same manner as Siege Engine for Maelstrom, which is nice. You can actually deploy it now. A lot of places had just ruled 6 inches like a Siege Engine. I do think that that would have been a cooler way to do it than board edge, but board edge than touching board edge, but it's whatever. Tom Bombadil, they've updated Hop Along to be once per turn. That had already kind of been dealt with the previous FAQ or errata / FAQ about only being affected by a special rule once. Now you just can only be affected once per turn. They want to clarify extra with him. I guess people kept arguing with it. Massive one, Dragonfire. It has been updated. So it's still 12 inches. It's still a strength 10 hit. It'll still automatically slay if it gets through. However, other models within 2 inches are now set ablaze, and they won't be automatically slain if wounded. It's no longer just a strength 10 hit to everybody. So now it's not if you bunch up, you just lose. That's very reasonable. I think a lot of people wanted dragons to change. This is a reasonable middle ground. I personally was hoping that they would just remove the AoE completely. I think Set Ablaze is a reasonable alternative. Some people argued for just like a strength 5 hit around it. I thought that was the same kind of deal. It still wipes people out. Now the things to consider is that, yes, you might die at the end of the turn. You could have the exact same models dead at the end of any given turn, and that's okay. However, they might not be. You might be able to put yourself out and get up, go prone, crawl the next turn, following turn, get up. Yeah, it's going to slow you down, but that's okay. But the key thing is now the dragons can't do it to wipe out their own people immediately, deny heroic combats, AoE regular models to hit heroes with it too. There's a lot more the game can actually happen. It's not just, hey, shoot phase, game's over. There's stuff to happen. I think that's a significant improvement. I think this is actually a pretty decently thought out change. I might have thought a little more heavy-handed with removing the AoE altogether. They want it to be Set Ablaze. That's okay. I think Set Ablaze is reasonable. I think there will still be games. Match play, we got a whole bunch of stuff. Scenarios that award victory points for killing the most expensive. What happens if the most expensive is part of a group? So for this, the whole thing needs to be scored, killed in order to score. So Shankrot Orc Scavengers, you got to kill Shankrot and the Snow Troll to score these victory points. That was expected by me. For some that have talked with me in the TTS Discord, that's how we've been ruling it for TTS events. It says that in regards to the secret objectives at the end of the book, which was a very strong indication of how they were going to rule this. So killing, it's got to be this. Now, they didn't clarify wounding, but it doesn't take too much to extrapolate that anything being wounded does apply. It's part of the same group. If you need to kill them all to kill them, any wound is going to suffice for the wounding. For Reconnoiter, they've added the hero dominant in regards to hero things. They've clarified as expected. It's still single hero. The dominant 3 only applies to total models, not to the hero specific one. So it's still just one. Contest of Champions. What happens if a hero is chosen and that hero does not normally deploy at the start of the game, such as the Watcher or Goblin Mercenary Captain? They surprised me with this. They have ruled that they're deployed as the scenario rather than their special rules for arriving later. So they have just fully said they're deploying. It doesn't matter if they say they don't. They are deploying, which is fair. I'm okay with that. My hesitance in the past to agree with this position was that people would argue that, okay, the Watcher is the champion and he doesn't deploy. I'm going to bring him in later. And then he gets free heroic moves because you've gotten one kill. And then he shows up and just dominates. And no, they said you can't do that. It's just they got to deploy as described in the scenario. Escort the wounded they fixed. It's now base contact and no enemies. That's how they've cleared it up. You don't have to worry about holding it because that never really worked. But that's all the FAQs and erratas. Overall, I think it's a very positive. Some of the cliff notes, of course, being Piercing Cry getting an update, White Hand getting some lightning changes and Grima changes. I don't think that they're very impactful personally, but they could impact more average games. Depths, I think, is drastically changed. I know people were hoping for stuff with the VPs and the Balrog. I think that ultimately the goblins being weaker makes the list more manageable. I know I've had quite a few games where I've killed every single goblin. Unfortunately, it kept going and it was hold ground and it was a pain, but it can happen. So I think that side is a little more reasonable. I think this overall is a pretty positive set of rulings. Now, of course, it's never going to be as much as myself or anyone else wants. I will say it far exceeded my expectations. I went into this talking with some of the other people saying, hey, if this one's bad, like, especially when it comes to the TTS stuff, we might have to just go a little more off the chain and make some rulings, even though we don't want to go too heavy handed. It was more of a, hey, the game needs something because it's getting a little stale for some people and we want people to play. I think that there is a very reasonable amount of stuff here that it's gonna shake some stuff up. People were expecting some Men of the West changes. I never was. I personally don't think that they're that good. People can disagree with me. I mean, I'm not saying they're not good. I've never viewed them as an S tier list. I think it's more of a circumstantial situation. Um, I think White Hand is still going to be pretty dominant based on what's changed. I don't think that it actually brings the power level down. I've always said that I think the power level is around the Krebine and the Oathmaker's rerolls to wound being board wide. I think those in conjunction are pretty disgusting, and that is a big power level. And we see Krebine impacting usurpers as well. I think Krebine really needed some adjustment this time around, and they did miss on that. I don't know what the adjustment exactly would have been. Some people are a little crazy where they're saying, oh, take away swarm and all that. They're not going to do that. I know they're not going to do that because they just made a whole keyword. They're not going to remove it. But modifying their wounds or their fight value or even their attacks on top of even removing the Dunlin keyword, I think all those could have been reasonable changes that ultimately they missed on. Hopefully, maybe when they fix Shield Wall, they sneak some more stuff in. We'll find out. But for now, in general, I think it's positive. I think everyone can take this and really see some change in some stuff, some clarification that helps the game flow a little better. I think there'll be a noticeable change in some capacity towards what we see showing up at events. But ultimately, who cares about all those other lists? Everyone should just be playing usurpers. Only take a max through Krebine because that's what the real winners do. I'll be making a video later this week talking about the event that I'm going to this weekend. I would assume that this FAQ is not going to apply because the event is in 2 days. But we'll see. Until then, that video will probably be sometime tomorrow. But until then, I'll see you guys next time. If you have any questions or you're debating about any interpretations about what I've read for the FAQs, maybe there's something I might have missed at first glance. It is, of course, very early. I've been up since 3 in the morning arguing with people on Facebook about things taking fall damage for flying monsters. They don't. But I will see you all later.